Antonio Santi Giuseppe Meucci was an Italian inventor and also a friend and associate of the Italian nationalist Giuseppe Garibaldi. Meucci is best known for developing a voice communication apparatus which several sources credit as the first telephone. Meucci set up a form of voice communication link in his Staten Island, New York, home that connected its second-floor bedroom to his laboratory. He submitted a patent caveat for his telephonic device to the U.S. Patent Office in 1871, but there was no mention of electromagnetic transmission of vocal sound in his caveat. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell was granted a patent for the electromagnetic transmission of vocal sound by undulatory electric current. Early life: Meucci was born at Via dei Seragli 44 in the San Frediano borough of Florence, Grand Duchy of Tuscany on April 13, 1808, as the first of 9 children to Amatis Meucci and Domenica Peppi. Amatis was at times a government clerk and a member of the local police, and Domenica was principally a homemaker. 4 of Meucci's siblings did not survive childhood. In November 1821, at the age of 15, he was admitted to Florence Academy of Fine Arts as its youngest student, where he studied chemical and mechanical engineering. He ceased full-time studies 2 years later due to insufficient funds, but continued studying part-time after obtaining employment as an assistant gatekeeper and customs official for the Florentine government. Meucci later became employed at the Teatro della Pergola in Florence as a stage technician, assisting Artemio Canavetti. In 1834 Meucci constructed a type of acoustic telephone to communicate between the stage and control room at the Teatro della Pergola. This telephone was constructed on the principles of pipe telephones used on ships and still functions. He married costume designer Esther Meucci, who was employed in the same theatre, on August 7, 1834. Meucci was alleged to be part of a conspiracy involving the Italian unification movement in 1833–1834, and was imprisoned for 3 months with Francesco Domenico Garazzi. Havana, Cuba. In October 1835, Meucci and his wife emigrated to Cuba, then a Spanish province, where Meucci accepted a job at what was then called the Great Tarca-Cubden Theatre in Havana. In Havana he constructed a system for water purification and reconstructed the Gran Teatro. In 1848 his contract with the governor expired. Meucci was asked by a friend's doctors to work on Franz Anton Mesmer's therapy system on patients suffering from rheumatism. In 1849 Meucci developed a popular method of using electric shocks to treat illness and subsequently experimentally developed a device through which one could hear an articulate human voice. He called this device telegrafo parlante. In 1850, the third renewal of his contract with Don Francisco Marta y Torrens expired. Meucci's friendship with the General Giuseppe Garibaldi made him a suspect citizen in Cuba. On the other hand, the fame reached by Samuel F. B. Morse in the United States encouraged Meucci to make his living through inventions. Moved to Staten Island, New York, Ontario April 13, 1850, Meucci and his wife immigrated to the United States, taking with them approximately 26,000 pesos feuds of accumulated savings, and settled in the Clifton area of Staten Island, New York. Meucci would live there for the remainder of their lives. In Staten Island he helped several countrymen committed to the Italian unification movement and who had escaped political persecution. Meucci invested the substantial capital he had earned in Cuba in a tallow candle factory employing several Italian exiles. For 2 years Meucci also hosted in his cottage his friends, General Giuseppe Garibaldi, and Colonel Paolo Bovi Campeggi, who arrived in New York 2 months after Meucci. They worked in Meucci's factory. In 1854, Meucci's wife Esther became an invalid due to rheumatoid arthritis. Meucci continued his experiments. Electromagnetic telephone. Meucci studied the principles of electromagnetic voice transmission for many years and was able to realize his dream of transmitting his voice through wires in 1856. He installed a telephone-like device within his house in order to communicate with his wife who was ill at the time. Some of Meucci's notes written in 1857 describe the basic principle of electromagnetic voice transmission, or in other words, the telephone. consistent un diafragma vibrante e in un magneto elettrizzata da un filo a spirale lo avvolge. Vibrando, il diaframma altera la corrente del magnet. Quest'alterazione di corrente, trasmessa all'altro capo del filo, imprimono analoghi vibrazioni al diaframma riceventi riproducono la parola. Translated. It consists of a vibrating diaphragm and an electrified magnet with a spiral wire that wraps around it. The vibrating diaphragm alters the current of the magnet. These alterations of current, transmitted to the other end of the wire, create analogous vibrations of the receiving diaphragm and reproduce the word. Meucci devised an electromagnetic telephone as a way of connecting his second-floor bedroom to his basement laboratory, and thus being able to communicate with his wife. Between 1856 and 1870, Meucci developed more than 30 different kinds of telephones on the basis of this prototype. In about 1858, the painter Nestor Corradi made a sketch of Meucci's ideas. Meucci intended to develop his prototype but did not have the financial means to keep his company afloat in order to finance his invention. His candle factory went bankrupt and Meucci was forced to unsuccessfully seek funds from rich Italian families. In 1860, Meucci asked his friend Enrico Bandolari to look for Italian capitalists willing to finance his project. However, military expeditions led by General Garibaldi in Italy had made the political situation in that country too unstable for anybody to invest. Meucci then published his invention in the New York Italian-language newspaper Il Corriere d'Italia, although no copy of such reports have ever been located dating back to searches prior to his court case in the 1880s. Bankruptcy. At the same time, Meucci was led to poverty by some fraudulent debtors. On November 13, 1861 his cottage was auctioned. The purchaser allowed the Meuccis to live in the cottage without paying rent, but Meucci's private finances dwindled so that he soon had to live on public funds and by depending on his friends. As mentioned in William J. Wallace's ruling, during the years 1859, 1860, and 1861 Meucci was in close business and social relations with William E. Ryder, who was interested in his inventions, paid the expenses of his experiments, and invested money in meʻuttʃi unregistered trademark S inventions. Their close working friendship continued until 1867. In August 1870, Meucci reportedly was able to capture a transmission of articulated human voice at the distance of a mile by using a copper plate as a conductor, insulated by cotton. He called this device, the teletrophono. While he was recovering from injuries that befell him in a boiler explosion aboard the Staten Island ferry, Westfield, Antonio Meucci's financial and health state was so bad that his wife Esther sold his drawings and devices to a second-hand dealer to raise some money. Patent caveat: on December 12, 1871 Meucci set up an agreement with Angelo Zaleo Grandi, Angelo Antonio Tremeshin, Sereno G.P. Briguglia Tremeshin, in order to constitute the Teletrophono Company. The constitution was notarized by Angelo Bertolino, a notary public of New York. Although their society funded him with $20, only $15 was needed to file for a full patent application. The caveat his lawyer submitted to the U.S. Patent Office on December 28, 1871 was numbered 3335 entitled Sound Telegraph. This is the text of Meucci's caveat, omitting legal details of the petition, oath, and jurat. Analysis of Meucci's caveat: Meucci repeatedly focused on insulating the electrical conductor and even insulating the persons communicating, but does not explain why this would be desirable. The mouthpiece is like a speaking trumpet so that the sound concentrated upon the wire is communicated to the other person, but he does not say that the sound is to be converted to variable electrical conduction in the wire. Another instrument is also applied to the ears, but he does not say that variable electrical conduction in the wire is to be converted to sound. In the third claim, he claims a sound conductor which is also an electrical conductor, as a means of communication by sound, which is consistent with acoustic sound vibrations in the wire that somehow get transmitted better if electrical conductors such as a wire or metallic tube are used. He emphasizes that the conductors for mouth and ears must be metallic, but does not explain why this would be desirable. He mentions communication with the ground, but does not suggest that a ground return must complete a circuit if only the wire is used between the sender's mouthpiece and the receiver's earpiece, with one or the other person being electrically insulated from the ground by means of glass insulators. Robert V. Bruce, a biographer of Bell, asserted that Meucci's caveat never became a patent and never could have become one because it never described an electric telephone. Conflicting opinions of Meucci biographers. According to Robert V. Bruce, who gave his personal interpretation of Giovanni E. Avo's research, Meucci's own testimony as presented by Avo, would demonstrate that the Italian inventor did not understand the basic principles of the electric telephone either before Bell invented it, or for several years after Bell invented it. However, other researchers have pointed to several bias, inconsistencies, and inaccuracies in Robert V. Bruce's account of the invention of the telephone. Firstly, with the very name used by Meucci to describe his invention, Bruce referred to Meucci's device as a telephone, not as the teletrophono. Meucci's purported relationship with Dr. Seth R. Beckett was another example of Bruce's bias against Meucci. In fact, Meucci and his legal representative cautioned Beckett against using and abusing his name for the company that Beckett had founded in New Jersey. Moreover, not only did Beckett's Globe Telephone Company base its claims against the Bell Telephone Company on Meucci's caveat, but the claims were also supported by approximately 30 affidavits, whereby it was stated that Meucci had repeatedly built and used different types of electric telephones several years before Bell did. Additionally, English historian William Aitken did not share Robert V. Bruce's viewpoint. Bruce had indirectly referred to Meucci as the silliest and weakest impostor, while Aitken went so far as to define Meucci as the first creator of an electrical telephone. Other recognition of Meucci's work in the past came from the International Telecommunication Union, positing that Meucci's work was one of the 4 precursors to Bell's telephone, as well as from the Smithsonian Institution, which listed Meucci as one of the 8 most important inventors of the telephone in a 1976 exhibit. Meucci and his business partners hired an attorney, who filed a caveat on behalf of Meucci with the Patent Office. They had wanted to prepare a patent application, but the partners did not provide the $250 fee, so all that was prepared was a caveat, since the fee for that was only $20. However, the caveat did not contain a clear description of how the asserted invention would actually function. Meucci advocates have alleged that the attorney erased margin notes that Meucci had added to the document. Teletrophono Company. In the summer of 1872, Meucci and his friend Angelo Bertolino went to Edward B. Grant, vice president of American District Telegraph Company of New York, to ask for help. Meucci asked him for permission to test his telephone apparatus on the company's telegraph lines. He gave Grant a description of his prototype and a copy of his caveat. After waiting 2 years, Meucci went to Grant and asked him to be given back his documents, but Grant reportedly told him they had been lost. About 1873, a certain Bill Carroll from Boston, who had news about Meucci's invention, asked him to construct a telephone for divers. This device should allow divers to communicate with people on the surface. In Meucci's drawing, this device is essentially an electromagnetic telephone encapsulated to be waterproof. On December 28, 1874, Meucci's teletrophono patent caveat expired. Critics dispute the claim that Meucci could not afford to file for a patent or renew his caveat, as he filed for and was granted full patents in 1872, 1873, 1875, and 1876, at the cost of $35 each, as well as one additional $10 patent caveat, all totaling $150, for inventions unrelated to the telephone. After Bell secured his patents in 1876 and subsequent years, the Bell Telephone Company filed suit in court against the Globe Telephone Company for patent infringement. Purportedly too poor to hire a legal team, Meucci was represented only by lawyer Joe Mulley, an orphan whom Meucci treated as a son. While the American Bell Telephone Company v. Globe Telephone Company, Antonio Meucci, al. trial was going on, the Bell Telephone Company became involved with another notable trial, the U.S. Government v. American Bell Telephone Company, instigated by the Pan Electric Telephone Company, which had secretly given the U.S. Attorney General 10% of its shares, employed him as a director, and then asked him to void Bell's patent. Had he succeeded in overturning Bell's patent, the U.S. Attorney General stood to become exceedingly rich by reason of his shares. Trial. Meucci's telephone was said to be described in the L'Echo d'Italia newspaper of New York in the beginning of 1861, though no issues of the 1861–1863 period are available in the libraries of the United States. Meucci swore in court proceedings what he remembered writing in the newspaper. However, no other contemporary news reports prior to 1875 were ever located to validate Meucci's priority claims of an electromagnetic telephone. The Havana experiments were briefly mentioned in a letter by Meucci, published by Il Comercio di Genova of December 1, 1865 and by L'Echo d'Italia of October 21, 1865. One of the most important pieces of evidence brought up in the trial was Antonio Meucci's memorandum book. This book, produced by Ryder and Clark, contained Antonio Meucci's noted drawings and records since 1862 up to 1882. In the trial, Antonio Meucci was accused of having produced records after Bell's invention and backdated them. As proof, the prosecutor brought forward the fact that the Ryder and Clark Company was founded only in 1863. In the trial, Antonio Meucci said that William E. Ryder himself, one of the owners, had given him a copy of the memorandum book in 1862. However, Meucci was not believed. On January 13, 1887, the United States government moved to annul the patent issued to Bell on the grounds of fraud and misrepresentation. After a series of decisions and reversals, the Bell Company won a decision in the Supreme Court, though a couple of the original claims from the lower court cases were left undecided. By the time that the trial wound its way through 9 years of legal battles, the U.S. prosecuting attorney had died and the two Bell patents were no longer in effect, although the presiding judges agreed to continue the proceedings due to the case's importance as a precedent. With a change in administration and charges of conflict of interest arising from the original trial, the U.S. Attorney General dropped the lawsuit on November 30, 1897, leaving several issues undecided on the merits. During a deposition filed for the 1887 trial, Meucci also claimed to have created the first working model of a telephone in Italy in 1834. In 1886, in the first of 3 cases in which he was involved, Meucci took the stand as a witness in the hopes of establishing his invention's priority. Meucci's evidence in this case was disputed due to lack of material evidence of his inventions, as his working models were reportedly lost at the laboratory of American District Telegraph of New York. ADT did not join with Western Union to become its subsidiary until 1901. Meucci's patent caveat had described a lover's telegraph which transmitted sound vibrations mechanically across a taut wire, a conclusion that was also noted in various reviews. Meucci's work, like many other inventors of the period, was based on earlier acoustic principles, and despite evidence of earlier experiments, the final case involving Meucci was eventually dropped upon his death. Meucci's wife Esther became increasingly frail and was invalided for approximately 5 years before dying in 1884. Meucci became ill in March 1889, and died on October 18, 1889 in Clifton, Staten Island, New York City. Invention of the telephone. There exists much dispute over who deserves recognition as the first inventor of the telephone, although Bell was credited with being the first to transmit articulate speech by undulatory currents of electricity. The Federazione Italiana di Elettronica has devoted a museum to Meucci, making a chronology of his inventing the telephone and tracing the history of the 2 trials opposing Meucci and Bell. They support the claim that Antonio Meucci was the real inventor of the telephone. However, some scholars outside Italy do not recognize the claims that Meucci's device had any bearing on the development of the telephone. Thomas Farley also writes that, nearly every scholar agrees that Bell and Watson were the first to transmit intelligible speech by electrical means. Others transmitted a sound or a click or a buzz, but our boys, Bell and Watson, were the first to transmit speech one could understand. In 1834 Meucci constructed a kind of acoustic telephone as a way to communicate between the stage and control room at the Theatre Teatro della Pergola in Florence. This telephone was constructed on the model of pipe telephones on ships and is still functional. In 1848 Meucci developed a popular method of using electric shocks to treat rheumatism. He used to give his patients two conductors linked to 60 Bunsen batteries and ending with a cork. He also kept two conductors linked to the same Bunsen batteries. He used to sit in his laboratory, while the Bunsen batteries were placed in a second room and his patients in a third room. In 1849, while providing a treatment to a patient with a 114V electrical discharge, in his laboratory Meucci is claimed to have heard his patients scream through the piece of copper wire that was between them, from the conductors he was keeping near his ear. His intuition was that the tongue of copper wire was vibrating just like a lever of an electroscope, which means that there was an electrostatic effect. In order to continue the experiment without hurting his patient, Meucci covered the copper wire with a piece of paper. Through this device he claimed hearing an unarticulated human voice. He called this device telegrafo parlante. On the basis of this prototype, Meucci is claimed to have worked on more than 30 kinds of telephone. In the beginning he was inspired by the telegraph. Differently from other pioneers of the telephone, such as Charles Bourseul, Philip Race, Innocenzo Manzetti and others, he did not think about transmitting voice by using the principle of the telegraph key, but he looked for a continuous solution, which means without interrupting the electric flux. In 1856 Meucci is claimed to have constructed the first electromagnetic telephone, made of an electromagnet with a nucleus in the shape of a horseshoe bat, a diaphragm of animal skin, stiffened with potassium dichromate and keeping a metal disc stuck in the middle. The instrument was hosted in a cylindrical carton box. He purportedly constructed this as a way to connect his second-floor bedroom to his basement laboratory, and thus communicate with his wife who was an invalid. Meucci separated the two directions of transmission in order to eliminate the so-called local effect, adopting what we would call today a four-wire circuit. He constructed a simple calling system with a telegraphic manipulator which short-circuited the instrument of the calling person, producing in the instrument of the called person a succession of impulses, much more intense than those of normal conversation. As he was aware that his device required a bigger band than a telegraph, he found some means to avoid the so-called skin effect through superficial treatment of the conductor or by acting on the material. He said he used insulated copper wire. In 1864 Meucci is claimed to have produced his best device, using an iron diaphragm with optimized thickness and tightly clamped along its rim. The instrument was housed in a shaving soap box, whose cover clamped the diaphragm. In August 1870, Meucci is claimed to have obtained transmission of articulate human voice at a mile distance by using as a conductor a copper wire insulated by cotton. He called his device Teltrofino. Drawings and notes by Antonio Meucci claimed to be dated September 27, 1870 show that Meucci understood inductive loading on long-distance telephone lines 30 years before any other scientists. The sketch made by Nestor Corradi in 1858 mentions the sentence electric current from the inductor pipe. It was additionally claimed that about 1873 Bill Carroll from Boston, who had heard news about Meucci's invention, asked him to construct a device to allow divers to communicate with people on the surface. In Meucci's drawing, this device appears to be an electromagnetic telephone, encapsulated to make it waterproof. Historical debate. The question of whether Bell was the true inventor of the telephone is perhaps the single most litigated fact in U.S. history, and the Bell patents were defended in some 600 cases. Meucci was a defendant in American Bell Telephone Company v. Globe Telephone Company and others. N. Herbert in his History of the Telephone said, "Debate the Bell Company became almost a national sport. Any sort of claimant, with any sort of wild tale of prior invention, could find a speculator to support him. On they came, a motley array, some in rags, some on nags, and some in velvet gowns. One of them claimed to have done wonders with an iron hoop and a file in 1867. A second had a marvelous table with glass legs. A third swore that he had made a telephone in 1860. but did not know what it was until he saw Bell's patent. And a fourth told a vivid story of having heard a bullfrog croak via a telegraph wire which was strung into a certain cellar in Racine, in 1851. William J. Wallace unregistered trademark S ruling was regarded by historian GiovanniAvo as one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in the history of the U.S., and one of the most offensive too. 2002 Congressional resolution. In 2002, on the initiative of Congressman Vito Fossella, in cooperation with an Italian-American deputation, the U.S. House of Representatives passed United States Has 269 on Antonio Meucci, stating that the life and achievements of Antonio Meucci should be recognized, and his work in the invention of the telephone should be acknowledged. Within its preamble it stated that, if Meucci had been able to pay the $10 fee to maintain the caveat after 1874, no patent could have been issued to Bell. The resolution's sponsor described it as a message that rings loud and clear, recognizing the true inventor of the telephone, Antonio Meucci. In 2002 some news articles reported, the resolution said his teletrophono, demonstrated in New York in 1860, made him the inventor of the telephone in the place of Bell, who took out a patent 16 years later. A similar resolution was introduced to the U.S. Senate but no vote was held on the resolution. Some have disagreed with the House of Representatives resolution. Additionally, there was some criticism that Resolution 269 impugned Bell's morality. The Government of Canada responded 10 days later by unanimously passing a parliamentary motion stating that Alexander Graham Bell was the inventor of the telephone. Others, however, believe House Resolution 269 redressed a historic injustice, and the Italian newspaper La Repubblica hailed the vote to recognize Meucci as a belated comeuppance for Bell. Garibaldi Meucci Museum. The Order of the Sons of Italy in America maintains a Garibaldi Meucci Museum on Staten Island. The museum is located in a house that was built in 1840, purchased by Meucci in 1850, and rented to Giuseppe Garibaldi from 1850 to 1854. Exhibits include Meucci unregistered trademark S models and drawing and pictures relating to his life. In popular culture, in the 1990 motion picture The Godfather Part 3, the character Joey Zaza mentions Meucci as the inventor of the telephone. Meucci's name was also on the license plate of the Cadillac Zaza was auctioning off. In the television series The Sopranos, the character Tony Soprano also mentions Meucci as the inventor of the telephone, stating he was robbed of being given proper credit. In 2003 the Italian Communication Ministry and the Italian Postal and Telegraph Society produced AA052 stamp portraying Antonio Meucci as the inventor of the telephone. A 2005 TV series produced by the Italian National Broadcasting Network, depicts Mr. Edward B. Grant as cheating Meucci and Alexander Graham Bell as obtaining success by more or less illegal means. Google commemorated with a special logo Bell. In April 2008 the Italian-language Google website celebrated Meucci's 200th birth anniversary with a special holiday logo on their webpage. While Bell's logo was adopted by Google worldwide, the Meucci doodle was only visible on the Italian-language Google. Other inventions. This list is also taken from Basilio Catania's Historical Reconstruction, 1825 chemical compound to be used as an improved propellant in fireworks, 1834 in the Florence's Teatro della Pergola, he sets up a pipe telephone to communicate from the stage to the maneuver trellis work, at about 18 meters height. 1840 improved filters and chemical processing of waters supplying the city of Havana, Cuba. 1844 First electroplating factory of the Americas, set up in Havana, Cuba. Before, objects to be electroplated were sent to Paris. 1846 Improved apparatus for electrotherapy, featuring a pulsed current breaker with rotating cross. 1847 Restructuring of the Tarca Den Theater in Havana, following a hurricane. Meucci conceived a new structure of the roof and ventilation system, to avoid the roof to be taken off in like situations. 1848 Astronomical observations by means of a marine telescope worth $280. 1849 Chemical process for the preservation of corpses, to cope with the high demand for bodies of immigrants to be sent to Europe, avoiding decomposition during the many weeks' navigation. 1849 First discovery of electrical transmission of speech. 1850 January 1st Stearic Candle Factory of the Americas, set up in Clifton, New York. 1855 Realization of celestas, with crystal bars instead of steel, and pianos. 1856 First lager beer factory of Staten Island, the Clifton Brewery, in Clifton, New York. 1858 a Euro 60 invention of paraffin candles. U.S. Patent number 22739 on a candle mold for the same, and U.S. Patent number 30180 on a rotating blade device for finishing the same. 1860 First paraffin candle factory in the world, the New York Paraffin Candle Company, set up in Clifton, New York, early in 1860, then moved to Stapleton, NY. It produced over 1,000 candles per day. 1860 Experiments on the use of dry batteries in electrical traction and other industrial applications. 1860 Process to turn red corals into a pink color, as requested by Enrico Bendolari, a merchant of New York. 1862 U.S. Patent number 36192 on a kerosene lamp that generates a very bright flame, without smoke thanks to electricity developed by two thin platinum plates embracing the flame. 1862 a Euro 63 process for treating and bleaching oil or kerosene to obtain cicative oils for paint. Antonio Meucci patent oil was sold by Ryder and Clark Company, 51 Broad Street, New York, and exported to Europe. See expert comment. 1864 Invention of new, more destructive ammunition for guns and cannons, proposed to the U.S. Army and to General Giuseppe Garibaldi. 1864 a Euro 65 processes to obtain paper pulp from wood or other vegetable substances. Associated Press was interested in producing paper with this process, which was also the first to introduce the recovery of the leaching liquor. See expert comment. 1865 process for making wicks out of vegetable fiber, U.S. patent number 46607. 1867 a paper factory, the Perth Amboy Fiber Company, was set up, in Perth Amboy, NJ. The paper pulp was obtained from either marsh grass or wood. It was the first to recycle waste paper. See expert comment. 1871 U.S. Patent number 122478 effervescent drinks, fruit vitamin-rich drinks that Meucci found useful during his recovery from the wounds and burns caused by the explosion of the Westfield Ferry. See expert comment. 1871 filed a patent caveat, for a telephone device in December with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. 1873 U.S. Patent number 142071 sauce for food. According to Roberto Muellini, general manager of the Italian Star Company, this patent anticipates modern food technologies. See expert comment. 1873 Conception of a screw steamer suitable for navigation in canals. 1874 Process for refining crude oil. 1875 Filter for tea or coffee, much similar to that used in present-day coffee machines. 1875 Household utensil combining usefulness to cheapness, that will find a ready sale. 1875 U.S. Patent number 168273 Lactometer, for chemically detecting adulterations of milk. It anticipates by 15 years the well-known Babcock test. See expert comment. 1875 Upon request by Giuseppe Tagliabue, Meucci devises and manufactures several aneroid barometers of various shapes. 1875 Meucci decided not to renew his telephone caveat, thus enabling Bell to get a patent. 1876 U.S. Patent number 183062 hygrometer, which was a marked improvement over the popular hair hygrometer of the time. He set up a small factory in Staten Island for fabrication of the same. See expert comment. 1878 Method for preventing noise on elevated railways, a problem much felt at the time in New York. 1878 Process for fabricating ornamental paraffin candles for Christmas trees. 1880 U.S. Patent application wire for electrical purposes, 1881 Process for making postage and revenue stamps. 1883 U.S. Patent Number 279492 Plastic paste, as hard and tenacious to be suitable for billiard balls. See expert comment. Patents, U.S. Patent Images in TIFF format, U.S. Patent 22739 1859 a Euro candle mold, U.S. Patent 30180 1860 a Euro candle mold, U.S. Patent 36192 1862 a Euro lamp burner, U.S. Patent 36419 1862 a Euro improvement in treating kerosene, U.S. Patent 38714 1863 a Euro improvement in preparing hydrocarbon liquid, U.S. Patent 44735 1864 a Euro improved process for removing mineral, gummy, and resinous substances from vegetables, U.S. Patent 46607 1865 a Euro improved method of making wicks, U.S. Patent 47068 1865 a Euro improved process for removing mineral, gummy, and resinous substances from vegetables, U.S. Patent 53165 1866 a Euro improved process for making paper pulp from wood, U.S. Patent 122478 1872 a Euro improved method of manufacturing effervescent drinks from fruits, U.S. Patent 142071 1873 a Euro improvement in sauces for food, U.S. Patent 168273 1875 a Euro method of testing milk, U.S. Patent 183062 1876 a Euro hygrometer, U.S. Patent 279492 1883 a Euro plastic paste for billiard balls and vases. See also, the telephone cases, timeline of the telephone, invention of the telephone, patent caveat, Alexander Graham Bell, Canadian parliamentary motion on Alexander Graham Bell, critical views of the motion, resolution and the patent caveat, Charles Borsell, Elisha Gray, Emile Berliner, Garibaldi Memorial, Innocenzo Manzetti, Philip Race, Thomas Edison. References, notes. Bibliography. Further reading, Documents of the Trial, Antonio Meucci's Deposition, New York Public Library Euro Annex, New York. NY National Archives and Records Administration, New York, New York. Philae Records of the U.S. Circuit Court, Southern District of New York, The American Bell Telephone Company a.l. B. The Globe Telephone Company a.l. Affidavit of Michael Lemmy sworn September 28, 1885. National Archives and Records Administration. Washington, D.C. A Euro RG 48. Interior Department File 4513-1885. Enclosure 2, Scientific and Historic Research, Catania Basilio, 2002, The U.S. Government vs. Alexander Graham Bell, An Important Acknowledgement, Bulletin of Science, Technology and Society 22, 426 a Euro 442, Italian Society of Electrotechnics Sala Antonio Meucci, Scientific American Supplement No. 520, December 19, 1885, Rossi Adolfo, Un Italiano in America. La Cisalpina, Milano 1881. Ievo, Giovanni E., Antonio Meucci Inventor of the Telephone, New Yorker The Virgo Press, 1958, no ISBN, IT/ICCU/SBL/02346990. Sterling Christopher H., 2004, CBQ Review Essay, History of the Telephone Invention, Innovation, and Impact. Communication Booknotes Quarterly, Volume 35, Number 4, pages 222 a Euro 241 doi, 10.1207 per second 153268996 CBQ 35041, Basilatos Jerry Lost Science, Other Media, John Bodini's Antonio Meucci Page Hearing Through Wires. Bellis Mary The History of the Telephone a Euro Antonio Meucci, Dozena Schiziano Thomas, Meucci, Forgotten Italian Genius, Bridge Apulia USAN 4, 1999, Dozena Schiziano Thomas, Meucci, The Inventor of the Telephone, Bridge Apulia USAN 8, 2002, Fenster Julie M., 2006, Inventing the Telefonia Euro, and Triggering All-Out Patent War, AmericanHeritage.com, external links, U.S. Congress Resolution 269, Bill No. H. Res. 269 for the 107th Congress, Summary and Status of Resolution 269, Museums and Celebrations, Italian Society of Electrotechnics Sala Antonio Meucci, the Garibaldi Meucci Museum, the Garibaldi Meucci Museum, Celebrations for the 200 years of the birth of Antonio Meucci. Official site of the Italian National Committee for the celebrations of the 200 years of the birth of Antonio Meucci. Euro April 2008 Euro April 2009, Antonio Meucci in La Storia Siamo Noi Italian TV program on Rete, Antonio Meucci Center at Copras, Antonio Meucci on Bob's Old Phones, Alexander Graham Bell Family Papers at the Library of Congress, 1862–1939, Alexander Graham Bell Institute at Cape Breton University.